do you think China and U.S. are going to escalate something that would be called a war purely in the space of cyber?
I believe any geopolitical conflict from now on is guaranteed to have some cyber element to it. The Department of Justice recently declassified a report that said China's been hacking into our pipelines, and it's not for intellectual property theft. It's to get a foothold so that if things escalate in Taiwan, for example, they are where they need to be to shut our pipelines down. And we just got a little glimpse of what that looked like with Colonial Pipeline and the panic buying and the jet fuel shortages and that assessment I just mentioned about the diesel. So they're there. They've gotten there. Anytime I read a report about new aggression from Chinese fighter jets in Taiwan, or what's happening right now with Russia's buildup on the Ukraine border, or India, Pakistan, I'm always looking at it through a cyber lens. And it really bothers me that other people aren't, because there is no way that these governments and these nation states are not going to use their access to gain some advantage in those conflicts. And, I am now in a position where I'm an advisor to the cybersecurity infrastructure security agency at DHS. So I'm not saying anything classified here, but I just think that it's really important to understand just generally what the collateral damage could be for American businesses and critical infrastructure in any of these escalated conflicts around the world. Because just generally, our adversaries have learned that they might never be able to match us in terms of our traditional military spending on traditional weapons and fighter jets. But we have a very soft underbelly when it comes to cyber. 80% or more of America's critical infrastructure, so pipelines, power grid, nuclear plants, water systems, is owned and operated by the private sector. And for the most part, there is nothing out there legislating that those companies share the fact they've been breached. They don't even have to tell the government they've been hit. There's nothing mandating that they even meet a bare minimum standard of cybersecurity. And that's it. So even when there are these attacks, most of the time we don't even know about it. So that is, if you were going to design a system to be as blind and vulnerable as possible, that's pretty good. That's what it looks like, is what we have here in the United States. And everyone here is just operating like, let's just keep hooking up everything for convenience. Software eats the world. Let's just keep going for cost, for convenience sake, just because we can. And when you study these issues and you study these attacks and you study the advancement and the uptick in frequency and the lower barrier to entry that we see every single year, you realize just how dumb software eats world is. And no one has ever stopped to pause and think, should we be hooking up these systems to the internet? They've just been saying, can we? Let's do it. And that's a real problem. And just in the last year, we've seen a record number of zero-day attacks. I think there were 80 last year, which is probably more than double what it was in 2019. A lot of those were nation states. We live in a world with a lot of geopolitical hot points right now. And where those geopolitical hot points are places where countries have been investing heavily in offensive cyber tools.
If you're a nation state, the goal would be to maximize the footprint of 0-day, like super secret 0-day that nobody's aware of. That whenever war is initiated, the huge negative effects of shutting down infrastructure or any kind of 0-day is the chaos it creates. So if there's a certain threshold when you create the chaos, the markets plummet, just everything goes to hell.
I
So
mean,
there.
it's not just 0 days. We make it so easy for threat actors. I mean, we're not using two-factor authentication. We're not patching. There was the shell shock vulnerability that was discovered a couple years ago. It's still being exploited. No, because so many people haven't fixed it. Um, so, the 0 days are really the sexy stuff. And what really drew me to the 0 day market was the moral calculus we
Mhm.
talked about. Um, Particularly from, the US government's point of view. How do they justify leaving these systems so vulnerable when we use them
Mhm.
here and we're baking more of our critical infrastructure with this vulnerable software? It's not like we're using one set of technology and Russia's using another and China's using this. We're all using the same technology. So when you find a 0 day in Windows, you're not just leaving it open so you can spy on Russia or implant yourself in the Russian grid. You're leaving Americans vulnerable too. But but 0 days are like that is the secret sauce. That's the superpower. And I always say like every country now, with the exception of Antarctica, someone added the Vatican to my list, is trying to find offensive hacking tools in 0 days to make them work. And those that don't have the skills now have this market that they can tap into where, $2.5 million, that's chump change for a lot of these nation states. It's a hell of a lot less than trying to build the next fighter jet. But yeah, the goal is chaos. I mean, why did Russia turn off the lights twice in Ukraine? I think part of it is chaos. I think part of it is to sow the seeds of doubt in their current government.
Mhm.
Your government can't even keep your lights on. Why are you sticking with them?
Mhm.
Come over here
Mhm.
and we'll keep your lights on at least. There's like a little bit of that.
Nuclear weapons seems to have helped prevent nuclear war. Is it possible that we have so many vulnerabilities and so many attack vectors on each other that it will kind of achieve the same kind of equilibrium like mutually assured destruction?
Yeah.
That's one hopeful solution to this. Do you have any hope for this particular solution?
Nuclear analogies always tend to fall apart when it comes to cyber, mainly because you don't need fissile material. You just need a laptop and the skills and you're in the game. So it's a really low barrier to entry. The other thing is attribution's harder. And we've seen countries muck around with attribution. We've seen, nation states piggyback on other countries' spy operations and just sit there and siphon out whatever they're getting. We learned some of that from the Snowden documents. We've seen Russia hack into Iran's command and control attack servers. We've seen them hit a Saudi petrochemical plant where they did neutralize the safety locks at the plant, and everyone assumed that it was Iran, given Iran had been targeting Saudi oil companies forever. But nope, it turned out that it was a graduate research institute outside Moscow. So you see countries kind of playing around with attribution. Why? I think because they think, okay, if I do this, like, how am I going to cover up that it came from me because I don't want to risk the response? So people are sort of dancing around this. It's just in a very different way. And, at the Times, I'd covered the Chinese hacks of infrastructure companies like pipelines. I'd covered the Russian probes of nuclear plants. I'd covered the Russian attacks on the Ukraine grid. And then in 2018, my colleague David Sanger and I covered the fact that US Cyber Command had been hacking into the Russian grid and making a pretty loud show of it. And when we went to the National Security Council, because that's what journalists do before they publish a story, they give the other side a chance to respond. I assumed we would be in for that really awkward, painful conversation where they would say, you will have blood on your hands if you publish this story. And instead, they gave us the opposite answer. They said, we have no problem with you publishing this story. Why? Well, they didn't say it out loud, but it was pretty obvious they wanted Russia to know that we're hacking into their power grid too, and they better think twice before they do to us what they had done to Ukraine. So yeah, we have stumbled
Mhm.
into this new era of mutually assured digital destruction. I think another sort of quasi norm we've stumbled into is proportional responses. There's this idea that if you get hit, you're allowed to respond proportionally at a time and place of your choosing. That is how the language always goes. That's what Obama said after North Korea hit Sony. We will respond at a time and place of our choosing. But no one really knows what that response looks like. And so what you see a lot of the time are just these just short of war attacks. Russia turned off the power in Ukraine, but it wasn't like it stayed off for a week. It stayed off for a number of hours. NotPetya hit those companies pretty hard, but no one died. And the question is, what's going to happen when someone dies? And can a nation state masquerade as a cyber criminal group, as a ransomware group? And that's what really complicates coming to some sort of digital Geneva Convention. There's been a push from Brad Smith at Microsoft. We need a digital Geneva Convention. And on its face, it sounds like a no-brainer. Yeah. Why wouldn't we all agree to stop hacking into each other's civilian hospital systems, elections, power grid, pipelines? But when you talk to people in the West, officials in the West, they'll say, we'd love to agree to it, but we'd never do it when you're dealing with Xi or Putin or Kim Jong-un, because a lot of times they outsource these operations to cyber criminals. In China, we see a lot of these attacks come from this loose satellite network of private citizens that work at the behest of the Ministry of State Security. So how do you come to some sort of state-to-state agreement when you're dealing with transnational actors and cyber criminals, where it's really hard to pin down whether that person was acting alone or whether they were acting at the behest of the MSS or the FSB? And, a couple of years ago, can't remember if it was before or after NotPetya, but Putin said, hackers are like artists who wake up in the morning in a good mood and start painting. In other words, I have no say over what they do or don't do. So how do you come to some kind of norm when that's how he's talking about these issues, and he's just decimated Merck and Pfizer and another however many thousand companies?
That is the fundamental difference between nuclear weapons and cyber attacks.